The stillness of the house was always the first sign. It was too quiet, too clean, too arranged, a stage set for a solo performance. The silence wasn't the natural, comforting peace of a shared space. It was an echoing void where a man's presence should have been. That quiet was screaming at me long before the first clue whispered. My life with Robert was, for 18 years, the kind of life people describe with envy. We had the comfortable home in the suburbs, 2 smart, grown children launched into their own lives, and the steady, predictable rhythm of a successful marriage. He was a regional sales director, a job that meant travel, meant long hours, meant business trips to Chicago or San Francisco, or more recently and persistently, Miami. I remember the first Miami trip vividly. It was 3 years ago, a week in late October. He was packing his suitcase, the leather one I'd given him for his 40th birthday, while I folded laundry on the bed. "It's a huge deal, Sarah," he'd said, his voice bright with the manufactured excitement he often used for work talk. "Meeting with the new division head. Gotta make a good impression." "Of course, honey," I'd replied, pulling out his blue tie. "Did you remember your new charger? The one for the laptop?" "Yes, and Amanda is going too," he added, almost as an afterthought, snapping the suitcase shut. "For the presentation slides. She's really brilliant with those." Amanda, his assistant, a name that was nothing then, just a pleasant, capable sound in the background of our marriage. I'd met her once at the office Christmas party, tall, polished, impossibly young, with a laugh that felt a little too loud in the quiet restaurant. The first few trips were fine. Predictable calls at 8 p.m., a quick update on the meetings, maybe a shared joke about the awful hotel coffee. But as the trips became more frequent, the 4-day Miami trip turning into 5, then 6, then a repeat trip just 3 months later, the calls began to change. They were shorter, less interested. "Hey honey, just got back to the room. Long day." "Me too, sweetheart. How was the presentation?" "It was intense. Look, I'm exhausted. We're up early tomorrow." "Just wanted to hear your voice. Love you." And then silence, no elaboration. No small, sensory details about the day that used to be his hallmark, no complaints about the humidity, no mention of a strange interaction with a waiter. It was just a performance, a perfunctory box check before he hung up and disappeared behind the door of his intense hotel room. I was sitting at the kitchen island one Tuesday morning, scrolling through the news, when the first real tremor hit. Robert had been gone for 3 days on yet another critical trip. I was deleting old emails on his laptop, trying to clear up space, when I came across a receipt from a local florist, dated 6 weeks prior. It was for a dozen crimson roses, not the usual lilies he bought me, which always reminded him of my mother. The delivery address was an office park downtown, but the recipient was marked as AM. My stomach tightened. Amanda's initials. But he was Robert's boss, a man named Alan who ran the division. Maybe Alan had used Robert's credit card? It was plausible. I tried to push the uneasy feeling down, folding the laundry on the bed, just like the first time he packed the suitcase. But the seed of doubt had been planted. It began to grow in the stillness of the house, feeding on the lack of detail, the late-night silence, and the subtle, cold distance in his voice when he was away. I tried to ignore it, to logic it away, telling myself that 18 years of loyalty couldn't be wiped out by a florist receipt and a tired phone call. The silence was screaming, but I was stubbornly turning up the volume on my inner monologue, trying to drown it out. The real shift came when I noticed the small, almost invisible change in his routine when he was home. The sudden need to take his phone into the garage while talking to his accountant. The new, expensive cologne he started wearing, a sandalwood scent that lingered on his freshly ironed work shirts. And the way he looked at me sometimes, a tired, distant glance, as if I were a comfortable, worn piece of furniture he had stopped really seeing. I kept polishing that furniture, serving the perfect dinners, keeping the perfect home, trying to recreate the warmth that I sensed was quietly leaking out of the walls. I knew, deep down, that the man packing the leather suitcase was already halfway out the door. The next trip was scheduled for Friday, a 3-day weekend in Miami. Robert said it was an emergency summit. I knew, with a sudden, chilling certainty, that this time I wouldn't be packing the blue tie for a simple business meeting. The Friday morning departure felt different. Usually, Robert would offer a hug that lingered, a promise in his eyes. This time, it was a brisk peck on the cheek and a distracted wave as he pulled the suitcase from the closet. The leather handle looked pristine, unworn, almost eager for its journey. "I'll call you later, Sarah," he said, already halfway out the door. His voice was clipped. "Have a safe flight, Robert." I replied, standing in the doorway. I watched him pull the car out of the driveway, the usual puff of exhaust fumes dissipating quickly into the morning air. I stood there long after the car turned the corner, listening to the sudden, familiar silence of the empty house settle around me. But this time, the silence didn't scream, it felt like a promise. I didn't waste a moment. The first step was to confirm the destination. I knew his flight details were saved on our shared travel account. I went to his office, a room he now kept locked, citing confidential client documents, and retrieved the spare key, which I had quietly copied months ago. Everything in the office was immaculate, sterile. I found his laptop, which he had forgotten to take, and logged into the airline's website. The flight itinerary was exactly as he'd said, 3 nights in Miami. A first-class round-trip ticket under his name, booked a week ago, but a line below it caught my eye. A second itinerary. It was an economy ticket, same flights, same days, but booked separately, and paid for with a different card, a corporate expense card Robert had mentioned but rarely used. The name on the ticket was Amanda M. Reyes. It wasn't the first time they had traveled together. It was the careful separation of the bookings that spoke volumes. The first-class ticket for the executive, the economy seat for the assistant. A convenient, professional distance maintained on paper, but closing the physical distance to zero inside a rental car or an oceanfront hotel. The confirmation I needed didn't come from the airline. It came from the hotel booking. I cross-referenced the corporate expense card receipts I found in a drawer. The Miami resort was the same upscale, ocean view place he'd stayed at before. He had booked 1 room, a king suite. The shock of the discovery wasn't a sudden, shattering blow. It was a cold, slow flood, rising up from my feet, turning my blood to ice. It wasn't the proof of infidelity that hurt most. I had already known that, somewhere deep inside the quiet corner of my gut. It was the calculated effort, the sheer deception over 3 long years, the careful lies that felt like little nails hammered into the foundation of my life. I walked out of the office and into the sunlit living room. I sat on the beige sofa, the one we'd picked out together right after our first child was born, and felt the weight of 18 years of shared history pressing down on me. I didn't cry. The tears were trapped behind a wall of pure, crystalline rage. My first thought was instinctual, revenge. A scene where I storm the Miami resort, find the room, and stand there in the doorway, a living, breathing conscience interrupting their paradise. But that wasn't me. That was the impulsive woman Robert had long stopped seeing. That was cheap drama. My revenge would be silent. It would be thorough. It would be absolute. I picked up my phone and called Mark. Mark was the locksmith who had fixed the deadbolt after we had a break-in attempt 5 years ago. He was reliable, discreet, and had known our family since he was a kid delivering newspapers. "Mark, it's Sarah Peterson." My voice was steady, surprisingly calm. "Mrs. Peterson, how are you?" "The lock's still holding up?" he asked cheerfully. "They are, Mark, but I need a complete change. All the exterior doors, today, and the garage code. I need a new set, something entirely new, and I need the old keys disabled. Can you do that this afternoon?" There was a slight pause on the line. "A complete change? Keys disabled? It's Friday, Mrs. Peterson. Is everything all right?" "Everything is perfectly fine, Mark," I said, leaning into the professional, slightly hurried tone of a woman managing a complicated situation. "It's a security upgrade. Robert is out of town, and I don't want any chance of a spare key floating around. Total discretion, please, not a word to anyone, and I need a receipt that just says Home Security Service." "Understood, Mrs. Peterson," he replied, his tone immediately switching to the serious professional. "I can be there in an hour. I'll get you set up with a master key and disable the old set completely. You'll be the only one with access." I thanked him and hung up. I looked around my home, the home I had decorated, the garden I had tended, the kitchen where I had cooked 1,000 meals. This wasn't just a house. It was my territory, my foundation, built on my effort and my faith. Robert had treated it like a convenient stopover, a place to rest between his business trips. By the time Mark arrived, I had a second task mapped out. Robert had a secret drawer in his dresser, hidden beneath old socks, a place where he kept personal documents and, I suspected, his secondary bank statements and extra wallet. I needed those. I needed to know the full extent of the financial bleeding. The emotional cost was steep, but the financial one could cripple me. The plan was in motion. The silence was still present, but now it felt like my weapon. Mark the locksmith was efficient and quiet, the kind of professional who understood that silence was part of the service. I watched through the window blinds as he worked, the mechanical clicks and whirs of the new cylinders being fitted, the digital pad being ray-coded. He handed me 2 new, heavy brass keys and a small, sealed packet containing the new garage door opener code. All set, Mrs. Peterson. Total isolation. The old keys won't even turn the tumbler now. If you put one in, it'll just jam, he confirmed, his voice low. Perfect, Mark, thank you. I paid him in cash, avoiding any paper trail, and watched him drive away. I stood by the front door, feeling the smooth, cold metal of the new deadbolt. It wasn't just metal, it was a boundary. It was the physical manifestation of the mental wall I had just built between my life and Robert's deception. Next, I went to Robert's office again. I found the silver cufflink box where he kept the spare key to his hidden drawer, the one beneath the pile of old, neatly folded socks. I pulled out the false bottom. Inside, there wasn't just an extra wallet, there were 2 sets of statements. One was the joint checking account, the one we used for mortgages and utilities, the one that always looked reassuringly healthy. The second set, however, was a separate savings account I had never seen, opened 3 years prior, the exact time the Miami trips began. The account balance wasn't astronomical, but it was significant, nearly $60,000. And the transaction history was damning. There were recurring large cash withdrawals marked as business expenses and client entertaining. But interspersed with the legitimate-sounding transactions were payments to high-end florists in cities where Amanda Reyes had traveled, charges at luxury spa resorts, and, most damningly, a large monthly payment to a lease agency for a small, sporty convertible. A red one, the kind a young woman might drive. Robert wasn't just having an affair, he was building a parallel life with my money. He wasn't just betraying my heart, he was actively dismantling our financial security to fund his deceit. The emotional devastation was now layered with practical, cold, hard anger. This wasn't about a fleeting mistake, it was about calculated, systemic theft of resources and time. I immediately called my attorney, Janice Harper. Janice had handled several complicated business divorces and was renowned for her quiet effectiveness. I had met her years ago through a women's networking group, and I knew she operated with the same dignity and precision I intended to employ. Janice, I need your help. I need to file for divorce, and I need an immediate strategy meeting. I have evidence of financial infidelity, I stated, skipping any emotional preambles. Janice, ever calm, listened patiently. Sarah, you sound incredibly composed. That's good. When can you meet? Tomorrow morning, Saturday, 9 a.m. I need injunctions placed on all joint assets and immediate discovery of the personal financial accounts I have just found. I need this done before Robert returns on Monday. That is aggressive, Sarah, but entirely possible. Bring every document you have, especially anything showing expenditures on the secondary party. The separate savings account and the car lease payments are gold. Do not confront him, do not tip him off. We want him to walk into the consequence, not the preparation. Her words validated my silent plan. I felt a surge of strength, the kind that comes from moving from victimhood to agency. The next day was Saturday. Robert was busy enjoying his ocean view, texting me bland pleasantries about how the summit was going well. I, meanwhile, was sitting in Janice's cool, oak-paneled office, systematically taking apart the life Robert thought he controlled. Janice reviewed the evidence, her face a mask of professional neutrality. This is strong, Sarah, very strong. The pattern of deception and the use of joint funds for the mistress's personal expenses solidifies your claim for an unequal division of assets. We will file the restraining orders on the funds and the motion for divorce on Monday morning. And what about the house? I asked, my voice catching slightly. I can't face him here, not when he knows he still has access. Janice smiled, a small, knowing upturn of the lips. Don't worry about the house. He will be served with the papers and a temporary restraining order at his workplace on Monday afternoon. Since you have changed the locks, and since he has not lived there continuously, especially due to these business trips, we will petition for temporary exclusive occupancy for you immediately. It's a very clean move, Sarah. He'll have no legal way back in. I spent the rest of the weekend cleaning out Robert's belongings. Not throwing things out, not vandalizing anything, that would have been cheap. Instead, I carefully packed his suits, his golf clubs, his personal documents, and his newly acquired sandalwood cologne into large, sterile plastic tubs. I tagged them neatly with the label, R. Peterson Personal Effects. The house was mine again. It smelled like me, lilies, strong coffee, and the faint, comforting scent of cedar from the closet. When I looked at the front door and the shining new brass lock, I felt a deep, quiet sense of peace. I had reclaimed my territory, not with a screaming match, but with dignity and a locksmith's precision. Monday was looming. The day Robert would return from his paradise, expecting to find his comfortable, predictable life waiting for him, but all he would find was a new lock and a new reality. Monday morning was crisp and clear, the kind of beautiful autumn day that seems to mock inner turmoil. I felt an almost unsettling calm. Robert was due to land around 11 a.m. and would typically be home by noon, dropping his luggage before heading straight to the office. I sat at the kitchen counter, sipping my tea, reviewing the final checklist of documents Janice had given me. The injunctions were ready, the divorce petition filed electronically, and the temporary exclusive occupancy order was waiting to be served. My dignity was the strongest shield I owned. At 11:45 a.m., I saw Robert's silver sedan pull into the driveway. I didn't move. I heard the engine cut off, the heavy thud of the car door closing, and then the familiar rattle of keys near the front door. Silence. Then, the second, more frantic rattle, followed by the audible, frustrated clink of a key jamming in the cylinder. Robert tried again, more forcefully this time. I imagined his brow furrowing, the slight annoyance that would quickly turn into alarm. He was meticulous. He never lost his keys. I waited. After a few more futile attempts and a muffled curse, I heard his footsteps retreat towards the side entrance, the one into the laundry room. He had a spare key hidden in a potted plant near the back gate, a secret we had shared for years. More rattling, more frustration. Finally, he pounded on the laundry room door, the sound sharp and jarring in the quiet house. I walked slowly to the door, opened the inner bolt, and peered through the small, high window. Robert stood there, his face slightly flushed from the Miami sun and the effort of the failed entry. He still wore his expensive Italian suit, but it looked rumpled now, the perfect facade slightly cracked. His suitcase stood forlornly beside the terracotta pot. I unlocked the window latch and pushed it open just enough for my voice to carry clearly. The locks had been changed, Robert. My voice was even, devoid of the tears or anger he might have expected. It was the voice of a cashier reading the total. He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. The shock was immediate and absolute. "Sarah, what is this? What in the world?" "I had a full security upgrade done over the weekend," I interrupted, maintaining that sterile, polite tone. "You can't get in with the old set or the garage code." "A security upgrade? Why didn't you tell me? This is ridiculous. Let me in, Sarah. I need to get ready for the office." He tried to sound commanding, the executive taking control of a silly domestic crisis. "No, Robert," I said simply. "You're not coming in. This is not your home anymore." The true meaning of the words finally registered in his eyes. The flush on his face deepened into a dangerous red. "Don't be dramatic, Sarah. If this is about Miami, we can talk about it, but not like this. Open this door." "It is about Miami and Chicago and the 6 different cities you've been to with Amanda over the last 3 years," I said. "And it's about the $60,000 you took from our joint savings to fund her lifestyle, and the red convertible." I saw the color drain from his face. He knew he was caught not just emotionally, but legally, financially. "I found the receipts, Robert, and the separate bank statements. Everything is documented." "You went through my things?" he whispered, the question laced not with remorse, but with indignation at the invasion of his privacy. "I went through our things. The house is mine now, Robert, temporarily by court order." I slid a large, official-looking envelope through the gap in the window. "This is from Janice Harper, my attorney. It's the petition for divorce, an injunction on all joint assets, and a temporary exclusive occupancy order for the house. You need to contact her immediately." He didn't pick up the envelope. He just stared at the house, the walls that were suddenly rejecting him, the space that had been his safe haven for deceit. "I packed your personal effects," I continued, gesturing to the corner of the garden where the plastic tubs were stacked neatly, labeled and waiting. "The key to your car is in the top tub. Everything else is in there. You need to go to work now, Robert. Your lawyer will be expecting your call." He finally bent down and picked up the envelope, holding it like it was toxic. The sheer coldness of my efficiency had rendered him speechless. There was no screaming, no melodrama, just the swift, undeniable end of his privileged access. He looked at me one last time, his eyes searching for the emotional woman he had broken, the one who would collapse and plead. He found only a stranger who had moved past him. "You've made a terrible mistake, Sarah," he finally choked out, his voice weak. "No, Robert," I countered, looking him straight in the eye. "My mistake was waiting 3 years to change the locks. Now, please leave the property." He turned, the heavy briefcase and the fancy leather suitcase suddenly looking like burdens, not symbols of success. He gathered the plastic tubs and trudged back to the sedan. I watched as he fumbled for the car key in the box, then slammed the trunk shut and pulled away. He didn't look back, and I finally closed and locked the window, sealing the silence that was now truly mine. The stillness returned to the house, but this time it was a settled quiet, the deep breath after a storm. I didn't feel triumph, I felt a vast, aching relief. The confrontation was over. The locks had done their job. Robert was gone, carrying his life's wreckage in plastic tubs. The next day, Tuesday, the consequences began to unfold in the wider world, starting with Robert's office. I knew he would arrive at his workplace humiliated and frantic. The divorce papers served on his desk, coupled with the knowledge that he was locked out of his home, would shatter his executive composure. Janice had ensured that the papers were served directly to him at the regional office precisely when he was due to meet with his division head, Alan. That evening, I received a call not from Robert, but from his best friend and business associate, Michael. Michael and his wife, Carol, were our social anchors, the couple we went on holidays with, the friends who knew our children. "Sarah, what is going on? Robert just called me from a hotel. He sounds like he's lost his mind. Divorce? Locked out." "What did he do?" Michael's voice was strained, a tight mix of concern and disbelief. I spoke calmly, deliberately choosing my words. I was not seeking sympathy, only stating the truth. "Michael, I discovered Robert has been having a sustained affair with his assistant, Amanda, for over 3 years. He used nearly $60,000 of our joint savings to fund a double life for her, including a separate car and luxury trips. I filed for divorce and secured an exclusive occupancy order for the house before he returned. I simply had to reclaim my dignity and protect my finances." The silence on Michael's end was long, weighted. "A $60,000 double life, Sarah? I can't believe it. I mean, the trips were frequent, but everyone thought business." "Everyone was wrong, Michael," I confirmed gently. "I needed you to hear the truth from me. I understand this puts you in a difficult position, but I had to take this necessary action for myself." Michael didn't defend Robert. He didn't offer excuses. He just offered a quiet apology for what I was going through and promised to support me, not Robert, in the coming legal storm. That validation from a mutual friend, a man who had known Robert since college, was a small, profound victory. It meant the narrative wasn't going to be about my hysteria, it was going to be about his betrayal. The social consequences moved swiftly. Carol, Michael's wife, showed up on my doorstep that Wednesday with a casserole and a hug that lasted too long. "That viper," Carol hissed, carefully setting the dish on the counter. I always thought she was too smarmy, hanging around the office after hours. She had seen Amanda at office functions, always perfectly dressed, always hovering near Robert. The conversations with friends and family were difficult but ultimately empowering. Each confession I made, calmly detailing the financial betrayal alongside the emotional one, chipped away at the facade Robert had built. My children, already adults, were heartbroken but sided immediately with me. They saw their father not as a flawed hero, but as a man who had chosen a lie over his family. The most important consequence, however, played out at Robert's company. It was Alan, the division head, who called me on Thursday. His tone was formal, grim. "Sarah, I'm calling you as a courtesy. We are aware of the pending legal action and the accusations regarding the use of corporate funds, or rather, the mischaracterization of joint funds as business expenses. Robert has been placed on administrative leave pending an internal review." My silent revenge wasn't just silent, it was strategic. By revealing the financial component and the car lease that Robert had tried to hide within his expense reporting logic, I hadn't just sued for divorce. I had triggered an investigation into his professional conduct. Robert's humiliation was now professional, public, and potentially career-ending. The executive suite was no longer his playground. "I appreciate the update, Alan," I said, feeling the cool satisfaction of knowing that justice had sharp, practical edges. "I have provided my attorney with all the relevant documentation of the expenditures Robert made in connection with Ms. Reyes, and I believe those records speak for themselves." The last I heard of Amanda was a casual mention from Carol. She had abruptly resigned from the company, realizing her position as Robert's assistant was over. Robert was still in the hotel, frantic, trying to arrange access to retrieve his remaining belongings from storage, an access he would now have to negotiate through attorneys. My act of changing the locks was the physical beginning of my legal separation, but its consequence was a powerful, public reclamation of my truth. I had not created drama, I had merely pulled back the curtain on the drama he had been staring in for years. The house remained silent, but now it was a silence filled with my own strength, not his absence. The following 6 months were a steady, deliberate work of reconstruction. The legal proceedings moved with the measured pace of true consequence. Robert's attempt to fight the unequal division of assets failed spectacularly, crushed under the weight of the documented financial deception. Janice was a meticulous general, ensuring every dollar Robert had funneled into his parallel life was accounted for and restored to the marital estate. The house, once a silent tomb of deception, became my sanctuary. I started repainting the living room, not in a fit of rage, but with thoughtful, peaceful deliberation. I chose a soft, warm gray, erasing the beige neutrality we had lived in for years. I needed colors that reflected my own quiet certainty. I remember standing on a ladder rolling paint onto the high wall when the final divorce decree arrived via courier. I climbed down, sat on the dust sheet, and opened the heavy envelope. It wasn't the signature that mattered or the stamp. It was the absolute, legal finality. I was Sarah Peterson again, legally and emotionally untethered from the pretense. I didn't cry then, either. I simply folded the papers neatly and placed them in a box labeled completed. The divorce was not the end of my life. It was the beginning of my true life. The healing was not instantaneous. It was woven into the mundane acts of living. It was in the taste of coffee brewed just for me, the quiet joy of pruning the rose bushes without needing to rush, and the deep, uninterrupted sleep I finally enjoyed. The constant, low hum of marital anxiety, the dread of the next business trip, the effort of pretending to believe the lies was finally gone. One afternoon, my daughter Emily came home for a visit. She found me sitting in the newly painted living room, sorting through old photographs. We came across a picture of Robert and me on our 25th birthday, young, hopeful, unaware. "He looks so happy there, Mom," Emily observed softly. "We were happy, sweetie," I confirmed without regret. But happiness is built on truth, and he stopped investing in that foundation years ago. He thought he could build something better in secret, but anything built on a lie is inherently unstable. It always collapses. Emily looked at me, a mature understanding in her eyes. "You handled this with so much dignity, Mom. I would have smashed all his golf clubs." I smiled. "That's the young, hot-blooded part of you. But I realized that anger only burns the container it's in. My focus wasn't on hurting Robert, it was on saving myself. I had to show him, and more importantly myself, that my worth wasn't tied to his loyalty. The greatest realization during this period was the profound difference between revenge and justice. Revenge is fueled by bitterness and aims to inflict pain. Justice, the path I chose, is fueled by self-respect and aims to restore balance. Changing the locks wasn't about hurting him, it was about defining a boundary. It was about standing up and saying, "This space is sacred. Your lie cannot contaminate it." Robert, by contrast, continued his downward spiral. He lost his job permanently due to the financial misconduct uncovered during the legal discovery. He and Amanda did not ride off into the sunset. The intense pressure of unemployment, legal fees, and the social ostracization that followed shattered the flimsy excitement of their affair. They separated quickly, realizing their connection was based on stolen time and money, not genuine depth. His consequence was a direct reflection of his choices. He ended up renting a small, sterile apartment downtown, a far cry from the life he had once commanded. I felt a distant pity for the man who had traded his comfortable life and family for a fleeting fantasy, but I felt zero guilt. He had built his own prison. 6 months after the divorce, I sold the silver sedan that reminded me of his rushed departures. With the profits from the equitable division of assets, I took a long-delayed trip to Italy, something I had always wanted to do, but Robert had always postponed in favor of business or safety. Standing on a hillside in Tuscany, watching the sunset paint the distant vineyards, I finally felt the emotional arc complete. Normalcy had been shattered by betrayal, which led to the action of changing the locks and filing for justice, and now, finally, to the quiet, powerful closure. I had traded an illusion of safety for the reality of freedom. I had saved the most important person in this entire painful drama, myself. Life, as I've learned, doesn't always give you a warning when the foundation is about to crack. Sometimes, the man you built your entire future beside is the one quietly dismantling it, brick by brick, receipt by receipt. When I look back on that Friday morning, the absolute certainty I felt when I called the locksmith, I realize that dignity is not a passive quality. It is an action. It is the fierce, quiet determination to reclaim what is rightfully yours, whether that is your home, your money, or simply your peace of mind. I could have screamed. I could have broken things. I could have chased him down to Miami and made a humiliating scene. But what good would that have done? It would have only handed him more power, forcing me into the role of the hysterical victim. Instead, I chose silence. I chose strategy. I let the law, the paper trail, and the immovable brass lock speak for me. My action wasn't revenge, it was a non-negotiable statement. You are no longer welcome here. The person you betrayed has moved past you. The lesson I carry now, on these quiet, honest nights, is this: when someone shows you who they are through consistent betrayal, believe them. Do not wait for them to apologize or change. Instead, invest that energy into fortifying your own walls. Learn how to change your own locks. It took immense courage to let the silence of the house confirm the failure of my marriage. But in that silence, I finally heard my own voice again, stronger, wiser, and entirely my own. I wonder truly what you would have done in my place. When you realize the person you trusted most is actively undermining your life, how do you choose to fight? Do you prioritize the noise of confrontation or the quiet, absolute power of closure? Would you have secretly changed the locks while your husband was on his business trip with his assistant? Tell me your thoughts below. And if this story resonated with your own difficult journey towards self-reclamation, please consider subscribing. It helps this channel continue to share the quiet, fierce truths of real life. The shock was not a shout, it was a slow, systemic freezing. When I saw the name Amanda M. Reyes tied to the identical flight itinerary, the air left the kitchen. It wasn't just the fact of the ticket, it was the method. Economy class, corporate card, booked separately. It was the blueprint of a man who thought he was clever, who believed his wife was either too foolish or too complacent to ever look past the surface of his success. I remember walking from the office back to the living room, my feet silent on the hardwood floor. The sunlight streaming through the window didn't feel warm. It felt cold, harsh, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, the same tiny particles that made up the illusion of my life. I sat on the beige sofa, running my hand over the woven texture, and the tears still wouldn't come. They were locked behind a profound sense of injustice. It was the stolen time that felt heaviest. The missed anniversaries he'd excused with urgent client meetings. The exhaustion he blamed on the travel schedule. Every sigh, every late-night distraction, every perfunctory, "I love you," over the phone now played back as a scene from his other, more interesting life. He hadn't just been unfaithful, he had been absent from my life for years while occupying the space in my home. I spent an hour just sitting there, letting the cold reality sink in. I didn't think about divorce yet, I thought about proof. I needed to know the full extent of the structural damage before I could call the architects. That was when I focused on the corporate expense card. Robert had always maintained a separate, sealed drawer for his personal financial records, hidden beneath his old socks. It wasn't a secret drawer because he was hiding money from me, it was a secret drawer because he was hiding himself. My hand trembled only slightly as I unlocked the silver cufflink box where the spare key was kept. The movement felt heavy, weighted with consequence. When I lifted the false bottom of the sock drawer, the sight of the separate savings account statements, opened exactly 3 years ago, the start of the Miami trips was like a physical blow. $60,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was significant money we had earmarked for our new sunroom, money intended for our future stability. The charges were worse than infidelity, they were a financial mugging. Payments to florists, charges at high-end spas in Scottsdale, not Miami. It wasn't just a physical affair, it was an investment in a replacement life. Then I saw the lease agreement for the sporty, red convertible. I remember whispering to myself, the words barely audible in the silence. He bought her a car. The sheer audacity of using our resources, the money I had earned, saved, and managed to by the tangible symbol of his lie broke the wall of ice. The rage that rushed in wasn't hot and blinding, it was cold, clear, and perfectly focused. It was this moment, the financial discovery, that clarified the path forward. This wasn't about a broken heart, it was about protecting the estate. My immediate call to Mark, the locksmith, was the first deliberate step toward reclaiming control. When he asked if everything was all right, my response was meticulously crafted. "It's a security upgrade, Mark. Robert is out of town, and I don't want any spare keys floating around." I had already chosen my language: professional, decisive, controlled. I stood guard while Mark changed the locks. The small, rhythmic snick, snick, snick of the new tumbler being installed was the most beautiful sound I'd heard all day. It sounded like closure. When Mark handed me the 2 new brass keys, they felt impossibly heavy. They were the keys not to a house, but to my sovereignty. The rest of the weekend was a choreography of quiet separation. I didn't smash anything. I cataloged everything. I carefully packed every suit, every tie, every golf club into large, clear plastic bins. I even included his cologne, the new sandalwood scent he started wearing when the trips became frequent. I was careful not to damage anything. This wasn't about vandalism. This was about inventory. Each perfectly folded shirt was a silent declaration. This no longer belongs here. I remember pausing over his wedding ring, which he had left on the bedside table. For a moment, I considered flushing it down the toilet, a dramatic, cleansing act. But I didn't. Drama was his territory. I simply placed the ring inside a small, sealed jeweler's box, tucked it into the top of the personal effects tub, and wrote a note, "For your attorney." I was dealing in legality, not poetry. My meeting with Janice Harper on Saturday morning was transformative. She was the calm professional I needed, validating my cold fury with legal precedent. "Sarah," she had advised, looking over the receipts, "you do not want to be served by the enemy's narrative. The moment you confront him, he will spin this as your instability. You have chosen the right path, dignity first, then justice." We finalized the papers, the petition, the injunctions, the exclusive occupancy order. Janice emphasized the strategic importance of the timing, filing the documents while he was away and serving him at work on Monday afternoon. "We want him to walk back into a life that has already been legally disassembled," she explained. "He comes home to find the locks changed. He goes to work and finds he's been sued and is now under company review. He loses control of everything simultaneously. That is leverage, Sarah." I spent Sunday evening sitting in the silence of the freshly organized house. I looked at the 3 plastic bins stacked by the back door, waiting for Robert's return. They looked pitiful, a meager summary of a life he had prioritized over ours. I had erased his presence meticulously, leaving only the memory of my own strength. The calmness I felt was not the absence of pain, it was the presence of power. I was ready for Monday. I was ready for the lock to finally turn in its new cylinder, sealing the door on 18 years of a lie. The hours following Robert's departure, after the shock had worn off, were not quiet. They were loud with the absence of him. I walked through the house, touching the newly painted walls, feeling the texture, and realizing that every square foot now belonged only to me. It wasn't just physical space I'd reclaimed, it was mental space. I was no longer waiting for the other shoe to drop. The process with Janice was swift and sharp, like a surgical procedure. The papers landed on Robert's desk just after lunch on Monday. I heard about the immediate aftermath not from him, but from Michael, who was trying to navigate the fallout at the office. "He went white, Sarah," Michael recounted in a hushed call that evening. Absolute shock. Alan was in the room, and Robert tried to spin it as just a domestic spat. But then he saw the list of financial demands and the restraining order, not against him, but against the joint assets. He realized you had taken legal control of the narrative. The true pain of Robert's consequence wasn't losing the house, it was the public humiliation of his perceived brilliance. Robert thrived on being the smartest, most controlled person in the room. I hadn't attacked his heart, I had attacked his reputation and his competence. That, for him, was the real death blow. The internal review at his company, triggered by the documentation of his financial mischaracterization of expenses, quickly exposed the extent of the resources he'd redirected to maintain his facade. This wasn't merely infidelity, it was a breach of professional trust. The public consequence was swift. The administrative leave became a formal termination within 2 weeks. He was not just a disgraced husband, he was a disgraced executive. I made a deliberate choice not to gloat. My dignity demanded a higher focus. I concentrated entirely on the children. I invited them over for Sunday dinner, serving their favorite, my slow braised lamb, the aroma filling the repainted, quiet house. "Your father made very poor choices, and he is facing the natural consequences of those choices," I told them calmly, watching their faces, their adult attempts to process their father's fallibility. "This divorce is about my reclaiming control over our future, not about punishing him. I want you to know that the security and love of this family remains absolute. His mistake does not define you, and it will not define my life going forward." Their relief was palpable. They weren't asked to choose sides, they were given the objective truth and the assurance of my stability. My son, David, spoke for both of them. "We're just glad you're safe, Mom, and that you're you again. You haven't been happy for a long time." That phrase, "you're you again," was the deepest form of healing. For years, I had been the exhausted, vigilant partner, constantly scanning for the next lie. Now I was just Sarah, focused on the present. The resolution didn't happen overnight. It was a slow thaw, punctuated by small, significant acts of self-care. I began taking pottery classes at the local community center, a hobby Robert had always dismissed as frivolous. The feel of the wet, cool clay beneath my hands was therapeutic. It was about creating something new, something strong from a formless, messy beginning. The act of centering the clay on the wheel became a metaphor for centering my life. I changed my routine entirely. I started waking up earlier, not to rush Robert's coffee, but to walk the dog through the park, watching the sun rise, a simple, solitary pleasure. I reorganized my time around my own needs, not his schedule. The quiet was no longer a symbol of absence, it was a canvas for intention. 1 year later, the financial dust had settled completely. Janice had secured a highly favorable settlement for me, recovering the lost savings and ensuring the marital home remained mine. I sold the house 6 months after the divorce was finalized. It was a symbolic act. While I loved the home, the foundation of my life could no longer be tied to a place where I had endured so much emotional isolation. I needed a fresh start, a clean blueprint. I bought a charming, smaller cottage nearer to the coast. It had a tiny garden and huge windows that let in all the morning sun. It was intentionally smaller, perfectly sized for one person who was learning to enjoy her own company again. It was the first home I had truly chosen, not negotiated. I saw Robert only once after the divorce, nearly 2 years later. We were both at a large, professional conference I was volunteering for a women's charity. He looked older, tired, and drawn. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by clothes that seemed to sag on his frame. He approached me tentatively near the coffee station. "Sarah," he said, his voice flat. "Robert," I acknowledged politely. No warmth, no ice, just neutral recognition. "I see you sold the house," he offered, a pathetic attempt at conversation. "Yes, I moved down near the water. It's lovely." He paused, studying my face, perhaps searching for the anger, the remorse, the pain he believed I should still harbor. I apologize for everything, Sarah. It was a terrible mistake. I regret what I did." I looked at him directly, giving him the gift of a single, honest moment. "I know you regret the consequences, Robert. You regret losing your job, your home, and your standing. But I believe you felt entitled to make those choices at the time. I have forgiven myself for staying as long as I did. That is the only forgiveness I needed." I didn't offer comfort or judgment. I just stated the fact and walked away, not in triumph, but with quiet closure. The man standing there was just a footnote in a long, powerful chapter of my life. My story isn't one of bitter revenge. It's a story of dignity as a weapon. I changed the locks, physically and emotionally, not to destroy him, but to save the integrity of my own soul. I learned that the most powerful form of action is the one taken calmly, decisively, and with an unflinching eye toward justice and self-preservation. That quiet strength is what finally brought the warmth back to the light in my life. I often think about the different roads I could have taken when I found that second flight itinerary. The road of confrontation, the road of self-blame, the road of destructive, furious grief. All of those roads would have required me to give Robert more of my energy, more of my life force. Instead, I chose the quiet path of strategy. I chose the locksmith. I chose the attorney. I chose the slow, steady work of repainting the walls and replanting the garden, finding beauty and certainty in the things he could never touch. My great realization, years later, is this. The moment you realize your partner is actively choosing a life that excludes your truth, your first and most important job is to secure your own boundaries. You must become your own defender, your own CEO of justice. The key to your life should always be in your pocket. I ask you today, if you are in a place where your foundation feels fragile, where your silence is screaming at you, are you preparing to build a new wall, or are you waiting for the old one to collapse entirely? Where do you need to change the locks in your own life today? Please share your thoughts on this story below. Your wisdom and support help this community thrive. If my story of quiet strength resonated with you, I hope you'll subscribe and join me for the next truth.